Our first question is from PORKSODA, who says, looks like the baseball team's bats are starting off hot. Who do you think the first real test will be that will give us an idea of the Hogs' postseason potential? We got the answer to that over the weekend. Oklahoma, Texas, and Baylor threw about 10 really good pitchers against the Hogs, and the bats cooled off a lot. Arkansas batters struck out 41 times in those 3 games, and the team batting average dropped from 316 to 296. Blood Red Hog with a follow-up on that, based on Van Horn's comments over the weekend. Are Casey Martin's days as a starter over? Will Moore be moved to shortstop or somewhere else? Also, after the losses over the weekend, do you still view this team as a top 5 team? Well, first of all, I don't think Martin's days as a starter are over. All we know is that he was benched for the Baylor game. But I do think there's more at play than just Martin not hitting well or striking out too much or making careless errors. I know Dave Van Horn well enough to know that when he calls a player out like he did Martin after the Texas game, and the kid's a preseason All-American, there's an issue that needs to be resolved, and hopefully it will be. As for losing all 3 of those games in Houston, 2 of them were by 1 run, and Arkansas missed a home run in both games that would have tied things up. So let's examine the real issue. And it wasn't pitching. It was errors that cost Arkansas the Oklahoma and Texas games. Unearned runs killed the Hogs. Now, after Van Horn shifted his lineup defensively for Baylor, there was just 1 error, and it did not lead to an unearned run. The problem in that game was Baylor's pitchers. All 4 of them had good stuff. They also got lucky in that Arkansas did hit the ball well at times, but right at people. And again, there was Kerstad's double that missed being a home run by a foot. Also, after losing 2 of 3 to Oral Roberts the previous weekend, Baylor won all 3 of its games in Houston, and Arkansas did play those guys closer than Missouri and OU did. Baseball is a crazy sport. The bottom line, Arkansas has 6 games to get ready for SEC play. A game against Illinois State on Tuesday. They're 3-7 on the season. They lost 3 straight to Oklahoma before beating the Sooners in Game 4 earlier this year. Now this weekend, it's a series against South Alabama. They're 7-6. The Jaguars lost 2 games to Vanderbilt, but then took 2 of 3 from Gonzaga, a team that Arkansas swept. Finally, there's Grand Canyon University. They took 2 of 3 from Oklahoma State and beat Oregon in a single game early on, but they're only 6-5 on the season. They're also one of those teams that seems to be a lot more competitive against Power 5 teams. So we'll learn a lot more about Arkansas before SEC play starts on the road at Mississippi State a week from this Friday. Hog says, seems to be bowl-level game interest in the game versus Notre Dame in South Bend. Any idea how many tickets will be allotted to Razorback fans and the price range through the Razorback ticket office? 5,000 tickets will be made available to mid-level and high-level Arkansas donors. Now, I don't have a price, but I'm sure whatever it is, it won't be an issue for those people. But if you don't fall into that category and you want to be a part of history, because the 2 teams have never played, Arkansas has never been to South Bend, be prepared to shell out some big bucks to a ticket outlet like StubHub. Notre Dame has never been a big deal to me, but I can certainly understand the interest on the part of a lot of fans. Cowhog32 asks, with low numbers at tight end this coming season, is there someone on the roster that could split time there? Like maybe an old lineman playing in more of a blocking tight end role, or even KJ Jefferson seeing some time as a pass catching tight end. He seems to have the body for it. Well, actually, a couple of defensive ends would seem to make more sense. Eli Hale and David Porter, they're not getting playing time on the defensive side. Hale was actually a good tight end in high school. Some have also suggested that Traylon Burks might jump in at tight end occasionally because of his size. Coach Pittman has said nothing about that, but he has said that he will address the low numbers at that position at some point. I think we'll know something in spring football. Justifiable Hogicide wants to know, what did the U of A do with all of Chad Morris's infamous and rarely used club dub equipment? Sound system, boogie lights, neon signage, etc. Well, PORKSODA answered that question with this. After a small adjustment, it was shipped to Auburn so they could reopen as Club Dud. Well, that's funny, but more than likely that stuff ended up where a lot of discarded equipment goes, in a closet somewhere. They have a lot of closets over at the athletic department, and you wouldn't believe some of the stuff I've seen in some of those closets. Speaking of which, we have a new Hogville member posting his first question, and it has to do with closets. Lifetime Hog fan says several weeks ago, you mentioned photos of players from the past had been removed from the Broyles Center, and even a portrait of Coach Broyles had been found on the floor of a janitor's closet. What can we do to get these restored to their previous places of honor? Well, they were pencil-type drawings of all conference and All-American players from the 30s through the 70s. They were taken down several years ago and put into storage. I don't know of any specific plans to put them back up, but a possibility might be that hallway that goes from the north end zone addition over to the west side. A lot of people have never seen that. It's just a hallway right now, but there's been talk it might get dressed up in the future. I've also heard that when the west side of the stadium is eventually renovated, there might be a museum included, so items that are currently being stored might end up there. Now, as far as that painting of Coach Broyles in the national championship trophy, I personally saw it and even took a photo of it in a janitor's closet on the floor at Bud Walton Arena 4 or 5 years ago. I don't know how it got there or what's happened to it since. It is a painting of a photo that was taken at the 64 trophy presentation. I'm told that the actual photo is on display in the North End Zone edition. Old Hog says relationships among college coaching staffs, high school staffs, and high school players take a while to develop. Do you think that Pittman will be able to keep his current staff intact for 2 or 3 years? You know, it's all about success. If Arkansas has really good success in the first 2 years, 3 years, I could see Barry Odom getting another shot at being a head coach. Kendall Briles, he's going into his 12th year as a college assistant. He's going to be a head coach. It's just a matter of time as to when and where. But these would be good things, right? If you're winning, you can always find quality replacements. If you don't win, who wants your assistants? Sam Pittman has already shown he can hire good coaches when a staff member leaves. My guess is he just replaces the guy. I wouldn't worry much about it. Yale County Hog 21 wants to know, what metrics do the NCAA selection committee consider most valuable? Arkansas is higher than most bubble teams in net ranking currently. Do you think that gives Arkansas an edge come selection Sunday? You know, Arkansas's net comes from its outstanding non-conference record and road wins at Indiana and Georgia Tech. Unfortunately, its conference record is really bad, 6-10. 8-10 is the best they can do. Some say that if they win 4 straight games, the last 2 games of the regular season, and 2 in the SEC tournament, they can get in. I think they have to win the SEC tournament to make it. Maybe I'm wrong. I did have a friend ask me if he thinks Musselman would turn down an NIT bid. I don't think there's any way that happens, but if the guy, as the guy pointed out, knowing the NIT, they would probably send Arkansas to St. John's, and that would be really strange for Arkansas's players and their fans, and maybe even Musselman. Swine American says, against Tennessee, the SEC cameras caught Rick Barnes having a friendly conversation with Mason Jones as if Mason were a player on his team. Problem is, Mason plays for us. Did you see that back and forth? And did anyone ask Mason or Barnes about what was said? Look, it was no big deal. Barnes said some really good things about Mason Jones after the game. I actually thought it was a class move by Barnes. The only way something like that is negative is if the coach is going off on an opposing player, and that almost never happens. Honestly, if you did that, it would be a good way to get fired, and I think coaches know that. Tejano Hog says, on a lighter note, certain coaches have become known for certain catchphrases and the potential danger of having them when expectations aren't met. That is, Chad Morris and John L. Smith. Do you know other memorable lines from any of our past coaches, good or bad? Well, you know, Sam Pittman, he's got that yes sir thing, but that's a reaction to something that's already happened, not a prediction. So I don't see that as a problem. No coincidence, in my opinion, that the 2 coaches that had those prediction type slogans are the 2 worst coaches Arkansas has ever had. I think most Hog fans would be happy to never hear another hyped up slogan, just play the game. Hogfat asks, at what point into our next football season would you reasonably expect to have surmised a pretty accurate insight into how the balance of the season is likely to play out? You know, the season opener should tell us a lot. Nevada is a decent mid-major, the kind of team that Arkansas has lost to and even been embarrassed by over the past 2 seasons. Take care of business in that game. go to South Bend and play well against Notre Dame, and I think we'll already know a lot about this team. Come back and beat Mississippi State on the road, and Hog fans will be jumping for joy. Beat the Aggies in Jerry World, they'll be going crazy. Maybe it'll happen, but I think we'll learn a lot about this staff and how the players are performing under that staff in spring football, and that's what, 2 weeks away? I'm looking forward to it. Orlando Hog wants to know, after losing to Georgia on the road, what do you think is a more valuable position for the men's basketball program in terms of recruiting and progress, making the NCAA tournament and getting bounced out in the first or second round by a lower level school, or making the NIT and making a deep run? Come on, you always want to go to the dance even if you can't dance worth a flip and your date is a world-class dancer. The NIT is not close to that experience, and if Arkansas were to get in, I think they actually might win a game. But again, I really think they're NIT bound. Said 76 asked, do you think the powers that be really believe that the spring game would be allowed to be in Little Rock every other year, or did they pull a fast one on Central Arkansas by offering that compromise, knowing full well it would most likely be denied? Boy, that's the $64,000 question, and I doubt we'll ever know for sure what the answer is. What makes it suspicious is this. 2 years ago, when the War Memorial contract to play a game a year in Little Rock with the U of A ran out, Arkansas was in the process of replacing its turf at Reynolds Razorback Stadium with natural grass. At the time that the spring game was going to be held, there was nothing out there but dirt. So it was either not play the game at all or move it to Little Rock. So there was a good reason why a waiver was allowed by the SEC in that instance. But was the so-called every other year spring game at War Memorial ever really going to happen? Even if the U of A pulled a fast one, who's going to admit it? Certainly not Arkansas or the SEC office. To me, the only question that matters now is what happens to that every other year game with Missouri. There are questions about certain terms of the contract, selling the required number of tickets. Can they come up with the money for required improvements? And even if that happens, what happens when the contract runs out in 3 years? What is Sam Pittman's position on playing games in Little Rock moving forward? Now, Wally Hall wrote last week that if playing in Little Rock goes away, enrollment of students from Central Arkansas at the University of Arkansas will go down. I'm not sure I agree with that. Older fans are the ones that value the tradition of playing in War Memorial. College-age students probably want the games on campus no matter where they're from. To me, this whole issue boils down to one thing. If you can win 9 games, 10 games a year, it won't matter if Little Rock games go away. But right now, it does matter, and that's the issue. Lanny wants to know, what happened in the Georgia game? Arkansas had looked really good since Isaiah Joe came back, but Saturday, some of the same old problems popped back up. You know, Arkansas did a really good job of dealing with its lack of size in non-conference play, but it's been a problem since early January. Basically, the Hogs' forwards vanished against Georgia. Reggie Chaney played 2 minutes, no points, no rebounds. I think he did have a blocked shot. Ethan Henderson played 6 minutes, and he managed to pick up 4 fouls in 6 minutes while scoring no points with no rebounds. That left it up to Adriel Bailey, who played 21 minutes, but he fouled out after scoring 6 points with 4 rebounds. Mason Jones, Isaiah Joe, and Desi Sills combined for 73 points. But it's hard to win when you get outscored 50-30 in the paint while giving up 16 second chance points and getting killed on the boards to the tune of like 40-29. Now, Georgia has maybe the best player in the SEC in Anthony Simmons, a great outside shooter. He scored 26 points. But the reason Georgia has lost so many games this year is because their second leading scorer behind him is 6'9" forward Rashawn Hammonds, who came in averaging 12 points a game. But because Arkansas's post defense was so bad, he scored 22 points, and Georgia had 4 other players in double figures. This loss was all about defense, and it usually is when you give up 99 points. But the interior defense was as bad as it's been this season. Is there an answer? Yeah, recruiting. This will be a much bigger team next year with a deeper bench and better overall talent. Okay, I want to say something about a question I answered last week. It had to do with the regression of the men's track program from winning national championships to not even being able to win an SEC title. Well, timing is everything, because this past weekend the men did win the SEC Indoor Championship. Now, the SEC is the best conference in track and field, so it is a big deal anytime you win it. I'm told that head coach Chris Bucknam, who some say is under fire, really helped himself with that win. I was also told that rumors that women's coach Lance Harder was about to take over both programs isn't likely going to happen. As it was put to me, you wouldn't have the same coach for men's and women's basketball. Why would you do it for track? Okay, that's it for now. Ask Mike will return next Monday.